Hello class, today we're going to talk about the rise of the Islamic Caliphates and the Islamic Golden Age. At the end of this lesson, you will get a sample practice short answer question. So, first we need to just talk about two basic vocab words when it comes to Islamic politics. The first is Caliph or Caliph. You can pronounce it either way, but this is the term for a Muslim political and religious leader who's a successor to Muhammad. So somebody who's reigning over ideally all of what's called Dar al-Islam, which is the house of Islam. So kind of like Christendom is the word for all of the Christian kingdoms, where majority Christians live. A Dar al-Islam would be where majority Muslims live, and so this would be trying to unite basically all Muslims under one major reign. So the leader of that political group would be a caliph. Just like a king is the leader of a kingdom and an emperor is leader of an empire, a caliph is the leader of a caliphate. Okay, so the Islamic world in the Middle Ages looks like this, and this is where we left off talking in one of our previous lessons, where the Eastern Roman Empire was falling, because they had fought against the Sassanids in Persia, and I said out of the Arabian Peninsula is going to come this new force on the world stage, and so here they come, okay, and they're going to take out the Sassanids in Persia, and they're going to give the Eastern Roman Empire a real run for their money, and eventually they will knock down the walls of Constantinople and take over what is modern-day Turkey. So, how is this happening? When is this happening? We're in the 600s into the 700s as you see the Islamic armies marching across this territory. Muhammad dies of illness, and so the question becomes, who should be his successor? Muhammad did not make clear who his successor should be, and so there was a debate as to whether or not it should be his son-in-law Ali or another man named Abu Bakr, who was a confidant of and a follower of Muhammad, an older, bit wiser, a bit longer in the tooth. Ali was one of Muhammad's first converts. His actual first convert was his first wife, Khadijah. Some scholars like to point out that really the first Muslim was a woman. But anyway, and Muhammad actually took several wives. He typically tended to marry widows because widows would be cast aside in Arabic society at this time and marginalized. And so this was a way of basically giving them a house and a home and modeling correct behavior about how to take care of others in your society. So Muhammad had sons and daughters, but the sons, all of them except his daughter Fatima was to the first wife Khadijah. But his sons did not survive him. They died before he did. So that left his son-in-law, Ali, and then his friend Abu Bakr. He did take Ali aside and he called him Mulwa in front of a crowd of people. And he referred to him as this several, at least more than once. And Mulwa means beloved, but it also means master. And so he had said to his followers, Ali is Mulwa to me and he should be Mulwa to you. But the question is, what does that mean? Because of the double meaning of the word Mulwa. Does this mean he should be beloved? He is beloved of me and he should be beloved of you, like you should take care of him when I am gone? Or does it mean master? Was he setting Ali up to be his successor? And so there was a lot of debate about this after Muhammad passed away. One of the issues is that Ali is not a super popular guy with a lot of Muhammad's followers. A lot of people just don't really like his personality. Some love him though and just adore him. So Ali decides to kind of play it cool. That's not a great phrase, but he decides to just kind of hang back, not stir up a lot of trouble, because Abu Bakr, he's an old man at this point, and Ali was in his 30s. So he figured, okay, I mean, how long is Abu Bakr really going to live? He can be the next successor, and then, I should be the natural successor after him. So Abu Bakr takes over, and his big concern is, okay, well, now that Muhammad has passed away, what are we going to do with the divisions between the Muslim Arabic tribes? Because yes, they were following Muhammad, but without a clear and motivating, unifying leader, it's very easy for them to slip back into their pre-Muhammadian ways of doing things, which was a lot of like intertribal conflict and warfare. And so he doesn't want, I mean, Muslims killing Muslims is a big no-no in Islam, and yet it was clear that this could very much be what happened. And so Abu Bakr has the idea of, okay, well, let's take that conflict energy and direct it outwards, right? Let's spread the word of God by the point of sword, and we will conquer territory, the whole Arabian Peninsula, and then some. And so that's what he does. So he comes up with the idea of this external jihad, right? Now, we've talked about what jihad usually means. Usually, jihad means internal struggle, the struggle to know what's right and wrong and to do the right thing. But Abu Bakr pushes this idea of outward struggle and external jihad against non-Muslims, expanding Muslim territory. All right, so Ali was not wrong in his calculations. Abu Bakr, as I said, was an old man, and he knows that he is coming up on the end of his time on this planet. And so before he dies, he backs a guy named Omar as his successor. And after he makes that clear that he wants Omar to succeed him, Bakr passes away. Now, Ali's followers think that it should be his turn, but the Bakr followers back his pick, Omar. And so Omar winds up being the one that then takes control. He conquers, he's the one who conquers the Sassanids and Eastern Roman territory. So after that war between the Sassanids and the Eastern Romans, they're both weakened. The Sassanids are having a civil war because they've lost a war that they really should have won. And so this is when the Arab warriors come out of the Arabian Peninsula, and they take advantage of this, and they do quite well. This is also where you see the concept of the people of the book. Who are the people of the book? Jews and Muslims. So they are given special status within this empire as they conquer, not just the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, but here you've got Jerusalem. There's a lot of Jews and Christians living there. So the Jews and the Christians, because they share some of the common texts and common foundational stories of Abraham, Isaac, Moses. The Christians also have Jesus, which the Muslims think is a prophet, not the Son of God, but a prophet. They get special status. They're like close but no cigar. Like, you were on the right track, and then you guys got sidetracked, or you misinterpreted some things, but you were close, and that's why God sent Muhammad down to kind of course correct. So they are given, they're secondary citizens, so they're not equals to a Muslim. They don't have all the rights of a Muslim citizen in this growing empire, but they do have standing as a protected class. They're allowed to practice their religion. They are treated much better than, for example, the Zoroastrians, who are Persians. The Zoroastrians are not treated well, and keep that in mind when we talk about Ali later. So Omar is fighting wars. He's taking slaves from the Persian Zoroastrians, the Sassanids, and they are not going to appreciate that. So the people of the book, they do have to pay an extra tax called a jizya. And that's a vocab word you're going to want to commit to memory, a jizya. I want you to go ahead and read this text about what the jizya is, and come up with in your head, what is this? Why? What is the purpose? So what it is it's a tax for non-believers, but like, why? What's the motivation here? The motivation is to try and get people to convert. It's a conversion tool. So yes, you as a Christian or a Jew can continue to practice your religion. Again, Zoroastrian's not treated so well. But since you're not a Muslim, you have to pay this extra tax. And nobody likes paying extra taxes. And nobody likes having to go out of their way as like a punished class, a second-class citizen, to have to pay this tax. And so the idea is that this will humiliate people. It'll persuade people that, like, oh, I don't really want to have to go through this. I'd rather keep more of my money. Okay, I'll just convert, right? It's one way of pressuring people to convert. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's not fair. You shouldn't be able to punish. You're living in the 21st century in a secular democracy, where you're not supposed to single out religious groups for persecution or extra taxes. But keep in mind that at this point in history, this is still providing the freedom to people to continue to practice their religions. And this is pressuring them to convert, which is not necessarily a nice thing to do, but it's doing so through coercion, but not force. There's not a sword being held to your neck forcing you to convert. And that is exactly what, at this point in history, a lot of the Christians are doing back in Europe. Violent wars trying to forcibly convert non-believers, persecutions of Jews, and we'll see that continue throughout Christian history. We'll see the Crusades, which is a holy war where they're attacking Muslims in their own homelands, forcing breakout sects that are Christians, but they just have a different version of Christianity. There will be wars fought against them. So, now with that kind of context, maybe think about what you think about the jizya and the practice of the jizya. Okay, this is also the time period in which the Quran and the Sunnah are being written down. So you'll notice, is this during Muhammad's lifetime? No, just like the Torah was written down after the stories that happened. The Quran, again, is believed by devout Muslims to be the exact words of God as spoken through Muhammad, but evidence indicates that this is when it was actually being transcribed. Same thing for the Sunnah, what he did and what he said. So it's being done from memory from those who knew him. All right. Omar winds up being assassinated by a Persian, a Sassanid slave that he had taken. Now, Muslims are willing to take slaves, usually non-Muslims, and the idea being, well, you can expose them to Islam and get them to convert, although often they're not freed when they convert either. This is something else you should keep in mind when we get to talking about Christian slavery and how the Christians treat their slaves and what the rules are and then what actually winds up happening. So, okay. The assassination, however, happens after Omar had actually already set up a committee to figure out who his successor should be. So again, because there was always this question of who should come next, he handpicked people to be on this committee to figure out who should succeed him if he were to die in battle or from illness or being assassinated. And this committee, it comes down to two choices: Ali or a guy named Uthman. Remember, Ali's been hanging out for a while here waiting for his turn. So who do you think the committee picks? Uthman. Pick Uthman. Ali is not exactly pleased. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to move myself out of the way here. Uthman finishes the conquest of the Sassanids in Persia, and he extends territory into North Africa. But he winds up becoming seen as corrupt, and this is because he would put family and friends in charge as governors of all this territory. He's got an extended territory. Now, for us today, we would think of that as like nepotism and favoritism, putting family members in positions of power and authority. But, Uthman would defend his policy saying, well, this is a vast new empire, and I know I can trust these people to govern the way I would want them to govern, because I know them. He also took a lot of gifts, which again, Uthman would say, well, who am I to refuse these gifts? It's rude to refuse a gift, but of course, others are looking at that as like being a way of bribing him, right? So he's seen as corrupt, and so there's going to be protesters show up outside his home one day, and while they're protesting and saying that he's being a bad Muslim because he's so focused on, like, there's this corruption and he's focused on money, he's a merchant, so he's interested in extending trade networks. Anyway, another person shows up claiming to have an arrest warrant that this person says was issued by Uthman to arrest all the protesters. And Uthman's saying, like, no, I didn't call for your arrest. It wasn't me. This is a forgery. This isn't real. And the protesters are getting rowdy and they're not listening to him. So he finally just gives up and like goes back inside in his house. And basically, while he's sleeping, some of the protesters break in and wind up murdering him in his sleep. So, During his reign, this is when the Quran was completed and the Arabic alphabet was standardized into its current form. Okay, so by the time Uthman has died, it's 656. It's been 20 years since Muhammad died. Ali is now in his 50s. Ali was one of the few people left alive who had known Muhammad, but who was still young enough to actually run things. So at this point, Ali is really the only viable option as a successor. And so Ali finally gets his chance to lead. Woo! But it's a very unfortunate reign for him. He only reigns for about 5 years. He does do some things like moving the capital from Medina to Kufa, which is more centrally located. So from Medina to Kufa here. But his reign is basically consumed with people demanding vengeance against the murderers of Uthman. And this gets really tricky. The people who had killed Uthman fled because they just killed a Muslim leader. But they amassed followers in Basra, which is in Iraq up here. And so Ali marches his troops forward to negotiate with them. But again, he's not trying to kill fellow Muslims, but the people who had supported, again, the killing of Uthman realized that those who had been part of that protest who had killed Uthman, they realized that they're still probably going to wind up dead no matter what happens. Because either Ali is going to kill them in a war at this point, or other Muslims, even if Ali grants them forgiveness and allows them back in the empire, other Muslims seeking vengeance will probably kill them in revenge. Even though, again, you're not supposed to kill fellow Muslims, but they killed a fellow Muslim first, so it gets very messy. Okay, anyway, so they feel like they've got nothing to lose, so they attack Ali's forces. This is the first time you have Muslim on Muslim war happening. Ali wins, but this is still a major blemish on his record. He's just killed fellow Muslims, not unjustifiably, but he's still done it. Meanwhile, Uthman's cousin is the governor of Syria, because remember he put in positions of power a bunch of his family members. Uthman's cousin says Ali isn't doing a good enough job getting vengeance. And this is really just a pretext to complain against Ali and launch a coup, launch an attempt to overthrow Ali's reign. And Ali is in a no-win situation here. If he tries to fight him, he's already a man who's killed fellow Muslims in a war, which is bad. But if he tries to negotiate with him, his own supporters are going to be unhappy and see him as weak because he's backing down for what is a pretty unfair press for power from Uthman's cousin. So either way, he's losing support throughout the empire. He's defeated and assassinated by people trying to end the civil war by killing both sides. So they only managed to really take out Ali, not the Syrian governor. So they're basically coming to blows, and some people who are like, we need peace between Muslims, let's just get rid of all these combatants, they only managed to kill Ali, not the other governor. So that governor, Uthman's cousin, becomes the caliph, and he declares his son his successor. So it's going to become an inherited thing now. So this leads us to what's called the rightly guided caliphs, which are the first 4 caliphs, and they're called rightly guided because they all personally knew Muhammad. I'm not going to go over the split between the Sunni and the Shia, but again, the Shia are the ones that backed Ali, and Iran becomes mostly Shia. That's ancient Persia, because Ali was the only one who didn't persecute the Zoroastrians, because he really just had too much on his plate. Like, I don't know if he would have if he had been in power longer, but he only had 5 years, and he fought basically 2 civil wars during that time, so he didn't have time to go after the Zoroastrians and the Persians. So that's why they really favor Ali, and they say he's the only right ruler, and his descendants should be the ruler. And so that's where you see the split. Okay. So this brings us to the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyad Caliphate is from 661 to 750. It is created by Uthman's cousin and then his cousin's descendants. And it's very focused on trade and the economy because, again, this was a merchant family. So you can see it spreads quite far. What European country is part of the Umayyad Caliphate? That is Spain, well, and Portugal, but Spain, okay? So one of the things I want to stress to you, okay, is that Spain was part of the Umayyad Caliphate. So here you can see Arabic influences on Spanish architecture still to this day. And the reason I'm making such a big deal about this is because still today, as we see an increase in hate crimes against Muslim Americans and Muslims around the world, people will claim, often like white supremacists, will claim that the good old days were the Middle Ages in Europe when it was only white people in Europe. You should already know that it was not only white people in Europe, because you had the Roman Empire and they had North African soldiers, etc., etc. They didn't care what color you were. There also obviously weren't just Christians in Europe. You've got Jews living there, you're going to have Muslim merchants, and you're going to have pagans. But also, Spain was not exclusively Christian or white, and it was part of this empire. And it was a hub of cultural exchange, knowledge, wealth, architectural innovations, intercultural, like positive relationships. Again, you still don't have complete equality. You have the people of the book, which are a step below full Muslim citizenship, but still, it's a good place to live at this time. If you're a Christian or a Jew, you would rather live under a Muslim leader than if you were a Muslim or a Jew, you wouldn't want to live under a Christian leader. Because the Christian leaders treat the non-Christians worse than the Muslims treat non-Muslims, at least especially people of the book. All right. The Umayyad Caliphate, because it's trade focused, it also moves the capital of their empire to Jerusalem and then to Damascus, because it's more centrally located to the trade hubs here, especially along the port there. So, right, that's the Umayyads. This is when the Dome of the Rock gets built, which you know about, so we're going to go ahead and move on. This map just gives you some spatial understanding of here's the Solomon's Temple that is sacred to the Jews in the Western Wall, which is all that remains of it, and then here's the Dome of the Rock. So this stuff is all right on top of one another, which leads you to today and fighting over Jerusalem. Again, we've seen this slide before. Okay, so the Islamic world in the Middle Ages is a very connected world. They are connected to major trade routes, including India, Africa, all the way to China. This is really where we think of the Silk Road as we think of it today, taking Chinese paper and gunpowder and getting it all the way into Europe. Stuff's coming into Europe for the first time, like coffee, oranges, cotton, paper, gunpowder. The word orange is an Arabic word, naranja. And it just, the vowel and the noun gets transposed and it becomes, instead of naranja, orange. So it's coming from the Middle East, it's coming from these caliphates. Okay. So in 750, the Abbasids overthrow the Umayyads because a lot of people had come to see the Umayyads as not properly Muslim because they were so money focused. Again, merchant family, very economic ties. So they overthrow the Umayyads and create the Abbasid Caliphate, which will last for until 1258. They moved the capital from Damascus to Kufa and then to Baghdad. Baghdad will become a major cultural hub, also a trade hub, but massive amounts of research and new works coming out of there. Baghdad is the place you want to be. It's like New York City. It's a cultural hub. It's several major universities. Anybody who's trying to think things or produce things wants to be in Baghdad. So the Abbasid Caliphate, this is what we would consider the golden age of Islam. Golden ages tend to be, awesome for a lot of people, though there's always an underclass that's not being treated great. That's true of any golden age that you look at anywhere. Here we're really going to focus on the highlights with advances in science, literature, government styles, etc. So during this time, the Abbasid Caliphate is very diverse. There's a lot of languages. It's a crossroads of Persian, Byzantine, Indian, and Islamic cultures. The Islamic focus on treating people as equals really opens access to many people for knowledge and cooperation. And the focus is on, literacy, learning, and religion. So people are coming from all over the world to study. They have the oldest public hospital in the world, the oldest university, which started out as a mosque, and madrasa, which is a religious school / university, and grows into an even bigger university. They're teaching not just religion there, they're also teaching philosophy, Greek natural sciences, law, astronomy, astrology. Astronomy is the study of the heaven, like the bodies in the heavens, whereas astrology is how the position of Mars affects your life. And, for most of human history, astrology has been considered the more important, although we know that it has no scientific actual backing. So, literacy is very important in Islam because you need to be able to read the Quran, which at this point in time is not true of Christendom, because church services in the Bible is still being written in Latin. It's not being translated into what we call the vernacular, the local languages. You're not expected to be able to read the Bible yourself. You're supposed to rely on the priest to interpret it and teach you what you need to know. So, but whereas for Islam, you're supposed to be able to read the Quran. So we'll see women were also being educated on how to read at this time. It's still kind of dependent on who your father was, but okay, so the oldest university in Cairo in Morocco. Something called the House of Wisdom, which was the major university center for translation and research, especially like it was collecting as many texts as it could from all over, anywhere they could, like in the known world. So Africa, Europe, Asia, to try and translate into Arabic. So they're getting translations from Greek, Chinese, Syriac, Persian. Almost every scholarly Greek text had been translated by 950. It was to the point where, like, when the Abbasids would fight a war, they would demand books as part of the bounty for, like, as part of the loot, because they wanted to translate them. Right? And like I said, this is happening in Baghdad, so like this is the hub of learning and exchange of ideas. New ideas are coming out of here all the time. And when they're translating these books, they're not just writing word for word what they're saying. They are translating them, but then they're writing commentaries, comparing different sources, analyzing them, summarizing them, synthesizing them, offering their own commentary. Aristotle in particular was very popular, and so there are a lot of, I think Ibn Rushd was known as the commentator because of how much work he did just commentating on Aristotle. There's a big focus on reason debate, bringing the idea of reason to not only understand the natural world, but also to try and understand God. Not that the human mind could ever fully understand God, that's not what they're arguing, but try and understand more about the Almighty. In looking beyond a literal reason of the Quran for sources of knowledge. So not just word for word what the Quran says, but could it be speaking metaphorically, and where else can we learn things from besides just the Quran? And so that is, again, depending on where you are in Christendom. For some people the Bible was literal and it was the only source of knowledge that you really needed. Other segments of the church were doing some additional reading, but it still mostly had to do with just theology, not often the hard sciences. Part of this does come from a religious motivation. There's a pragmatic use of like knowing astronomy, which helps you better align mosques to Mecca if you're improving like the star position and charting your geography from there. Keeping time better would help you sync up the prayers for your 5 daily prayers. So there's a religious motivation in some of this, and some of it is just pure desire to understand the world. Massive achievements in science. Book of Optics is written, medicine, Al-Razi, hospitals, as I mentioned, concepts of basic hygiene. Really, the Christendom is pretty dirty and gross at this time, and will remain so for a while. Well, it'll get a little better. It's not been great since the fall of the Roman Empire, and then it'll get a little better, and then when the Black Death hits, it takes a tumble again, and we'll talk about why that is, and stays pretty bad for a while. But like in the Middle East, like people have better hygiene habits, and they're also realizing, hey, if I like treat this patient and then I wash my hands and then I treat a different patient, the patients seem to do better than if I touch this diseased guy or like perform surgery and then take my dirty bloody hands and then try and do surgery on this guy. Whereas the Europeans haven't really figured that one out yet. And a lot of their ideas are still like that it's demons that are making you sick. So, okay, astronomy. Oh, major achievements in astronomy. They propose a heliocentric model of the solar system well before Galileo, for example, and this goes against Aristotle, but is supported by observed data. So again, we're seeing like critical data analysis as opposed to just, well, some guy said it a long time ago, so it's probably right. We won't see that really until the scientific revolution in Europe. Master navigators. They are known for how well they navigate. They created complex multivariable astrolabes for figuring out where you were in the ocean and navigating by the stars. So you can see these are astrolabes. and attaching compasses to them. Compasses initially developed by the Chinese, but then refined and honed by the Arabs. They calculated the Earth's circumference to within 2% of, its total circumference. A lot of the names that we still use for stars like Aldebaran and Altair are Arabic words. The al right in there gives you that hint because they made so many star charts. In terms of math, algebra gets created in algebra, right? Again, it's an Arabic word. Algorithm, Arabic word. Quadratic equations, polynomial equations, all the stuff that I'm sure you love to do in your downtime. I actually enjoyed math in high school, but that's coming from this time period in the golden age of Islam. They adopted the number 0 and numbers and the decimal system from India and used them so widely, and that's how Europe got them, that now we call them Arabic numerals. So again, they originated in India. They developed trigonometry. Engineering accomplishments were out the root, like there were a lot of them. Aqueducts, construction projects like we saw with the Roman Empire, but then automation, machines that work by themselves. The water wheel, the water mill, the giant water clock, multiple different kinds of like sand-based clocks, a fountain, a candle clock, a musical automation, the water flute. A lot of these are created by the invention of a crankshaft and a segmented gear. So this is like how you turn these segmented gears and they interlock, and that turns the mechanism. So our modern world still runs on crankshafts and segmented gears. They made a flushing toilet with a nearby service robot that would refill the basin when flushed, a robot that could serve tea, a 4-piece robot band that could play music while it floated down a barge to entertain people, and the music was like programmable with like pegs and gears. So again, massive like technological accomplishments. Islamic art and architecture at this time, the calligraphy, which we've talked about, arabesque designs. Again, here we've seen this in previous lessons. So in terms of literature and philosophy, Ibn Rushd is a massive philosopher, hugely important if you study philosophy. Literature, 1001 Arabian Nights, amongst many others, including poetry. And here I will take the time to mention that actually quite a bit of poetry was being done at this time. Some of these people on your slide is after our 1200 time period, but I'm not going to double back to talk about them later, so I'm just kind of lumping them in here, even though really Rumi is the only one that falls under the Golden Age title. Okay, so you have a poet named Rumi, who's again during the time of the Abbasids. He is still revered, and so is Hafiz, considered a saint, and yet they are writing poetry that very clearly has male lovers as the object of the poetry. And this is generally accepted without a problem at this time period. You can see here, I, you, he, she, we, in the garden of mystic lovers, these are not true distinctions. Hafiz's poem here, it happens all the time in heaven, and someday it will begin to happen again on earth, that men and women who are married, and men who are lovers, and women who give each other light, often will get down on their knees, and while so tenderly holding their lover's hand, with tears in their eyes, will sincerely speak, saying, "My dear, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind?" These are very gentle poems expressing love, and in ways that we today would label as LGBTQ. You have Bulleh Shah, who very famously learned how to do an exotic dance in order to win back the heart of the man he was in love with. Even when these poets would write from the perspective of a woman, women didn't often write poetry in this era, but so sometimes they would write from the perspective of a woman, and it was like very much immersed in the feminine identity, a lot of detail oriented. It's not just like a shallow overview or a cursory glance at the feminine perspective. And so, it could be confusing today to think about how today in a lot of parts of the Muslim world, LGBTQ people really struggle with acceptance and their identities and the laws of the land. And how did that happen if at this time period, these people who are still, again, held up as saints and these poems are still read and still held up as masterworks, of not only poetry but theology. A lot of mystic theology was done in the form of poetry. These are considered very wise and learned men who had a close relationship with God. And actually, a lot of times, the relationship between two men was considered to be more pure than heterosexual relationship was. So how do we go from that to today, the struggles of the LGBTQ community in a lot of Islamic countries? And a lot of that really can be traced to the conquest of a lot of Islamic territory during the colonial period by European powers. So this won't come for centuries still, and yet when it does, the Christian conquerors will be bringing with them very narrow views of gender identity and appropriate heterosexual relationship norms. And so you can actually trace more than half of the anti-LGBTQ statutes to this colonial period that's being brought in by Christian colonizers. That's also true of the Christians' encounters with Native Americans in North and South America, in Polynesian islands, in Hawaii, etc. So that I just wanted to put that on your radar, that this tradition exists and offers today a lot of LGBTQ Muslims a lot of solace, even if they're in countries or families where they don't feel accepted. They can still feel accepted by Islam because of this tradition by these theologian poets. Okay, women, when it comes to women's place in Islam during the Golden Age, today a lot of people think of Muslim women as being kept as second-class citizens or not given their full rights, or that Islam being oppressive to women. Now that is highly dependent on what country specifically we're talking about. So, Saudi Arabia up until very recently did not let women drive. But when it comes to religious rules, that obviously can vary based on sect, based on time period. And again, Muhammad's first follower, the first Muslim convert was a woman. He treated and elevated women. And so that kind of perspective I want to challenge for you by showing you that during this Golden Age, for example, women were also participating and contributing intellectually. Muhammad did not initially segregate his community and services, so you did not have men having to sit separately from women in early Islamic services. And then during the Golden Age, you have Fatima al-Fihri established the oldest university. Women, al-Astrolabi created astrolabes. She was a scientist. Shahada was a calligrapher, an artist, and a teacher. And then al-Mamali was an expert in literature, the hadith, jurisprudence, which is the law, arithmetic, and mathematics generally, not just arithmetic, but also geometry and things like that. So it can still depend on who the head of your household was and who your father was and your position in society. Are you a poor farmer? You're not going to have as good of an education anyway as if you're an upper class person. But women are here and they're doing things and they are contributing in noteworthy ways. So when we think about the Middle Ages, and this is happening like in the Middle Ages, 700s to the 900s to the 1200s, the Golden Age really being from the 900s to the 1200s. When we think of the West, we often think of like the Dark Ages. And that is clearly not the case during this time period in the Middle East under the Islamic Caliphates. And so, to say that the only noteworthy history is Western history, whatever that would mean, Western, or that Christendom was the only place that anything important really ever happened, that is so far off the mark. It is it's mind-boggling. So again, one of the questions we're going to look at is how do Europeans who seem so far behind ultimately come to be the colonizers who then bring these ideas of heteronormativity and things to the places that they're settling, and we will get there. But the Europeans aren't close to that right now, not even a little bit. So what I'm going to leave you with is this last question with a short answer practice. This is an AP type question that you will get. Normally you'll have 3 parts and you have to answer all 3 for this first one. You're just going to have to do this bit. Look at this prompt here, this picture, see if you can figure out what is in there and use it to help you explain and identify one aspect of this image that reflects the culture in the Islamic world during the Abbasid era. Now you need to do both. You need to completely answer the question to get your point for the AP. It's a 3-part question normally on the AP test. Each part is worth 1 point and it's all or nothing. So if it asks you to identify and explain, and you only do one of those, you don't get the point, okay? So you need to answer this question as a complete sentences. You should not use more than 3 sentences. These are short. You'd only have so much time on the AP test. So 1 to 3 sentences answering both parts of this question, identify and explain.